This podcast has been made possible by Ledge.
Hi, it's Betsy Ward. I'm the CFO of MassMutual, and I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 921.
We used to look back with our customers and say, here's how much we saved you. Now it's about not only here's how much we saved you in terms of millions of dollars, but also here's when the next crop of savings are going to hit. And I'm really excited to be able to work with our analytics team and be able to develop that in a more automated fashion.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's episode, we speak with Niki Heim, CFO of LogicSource. Back in 2014, when Niki Heim was hired as a controller at LogicSource, CEO Dave Pennino was confident Heim had the makings to be the company's next CFO. But not everyone felt that way, not even Heim, who tells us she just knew she wasn't ready. At the time, Heim remembers hearing people tell her, the work is going to come before the belief in yourself. And when the work did come, Heim tells us her confidence unquestionably grew. You'll hear that story and much more on today's episode. We'll begin after this. Does your finance team struggle with routine tasks like reconciliation and manually managing multiple bank accounts? Many tech companies today have complex finance operations and massive amounts of data in different disconnected silos. Whether you're reconciling across 6 different payment processors or between NetSuite and the bank, closing the books can be a nightmare. Ledge has found a better way. Ledge is a finance operations platform that connects all your banking, payment, and accounting systems into one unified platform. Ledge automates revenue reconciliation across all systems, right down to the transaction level, and instantly matches payments, invoices, refunds, chargebacks, or any other transaction. Ledge gives you real-time visibility into your cash position across all accounts and alerts you about issues and at-risk funds in real time, so you can act in real time. And get this, Ledge requires no engineering resources. Ledge plugs right into your existing stack, so you can get set up instantly. Ledge puts finance teams back in control. Learn more at ledge.co. Hello, we're speaking to Niki Heim, CFO of LogicSource. Niki, welcome.
Thanks, Jack.
Niki, we're going to begin where we always do, which is to ask you to look back and try to zero in on those experiences that you feel really prepared you to advance into a finance leadership position. When you look back, what comes to mind for you?
So I think about my career in 2 distinct journeys, which is LogicSource and pre-LogicSource. And even within LogicSource, there's been several phases and experiences that have shaped my journey. But I think it's important for me to go back first because I definitely didn't take the traditional path. And second, each step along the way has been a building block for me and ones that I am actually super proud about. So, probably like many people who are listening, I went the public accounting path. So right out of college, I took a job at UHY Advisors, one of the largest professional service firms, primarily servicing the middle market. And I took that role right in Albany, New York. It was there that I really was able to refine a lot of my technical abilities, my business acumen, but I did not enjoy it at all. I continued to have this growing frustration that, here I was just about to embark on the CPA exam journey, and I didn't even like the industry. I was frustrated. And my now husband, many years ago, he convinced me to join him in Anchorage, Alaska. And so I kept saying, what the heck am I going to do in Anchorage, Alaska? My family's in New York. But finally I said, what, I'm so miserable in public accounting. I'm going to go. So I packed a bag. I got on the plane. I think I cried for the 13 straight hours it took to get there. And the next morning I met with a recruiter who had a public accounting job for me. I took it because I knew I needed a job. And I joined a firm called Stevens Group in Anchorage, Alaska. And it was one owner, 6 CPAs, 2 staff. I was one of those, and 1 admin. And it was one of the coolest experiences ever. We did everything from payroll processing, bookkeeping, financial statement preparation, all the way through tax return. So I got to see every aspect, whereas at UHY, unfortunately, I was auditing very specific GL accounts. It was here that the people, the culture, the newness of the environment, and just talking about, how people lived in Alaska, it was thrilling. And I really threw myself into the work and recognized that I enjoyed it. And it was there that I studied for the CPA exam, passed the CPA exam. It was just overall a very cool experience. From there, when I decided what I wanted to do next, I wanted to try something different. I joined the largest bank headquartered in the Northeast, 50 billion in assets, about 300 locations. And I joined as an internal auditor. And same thing as public accounting auditing, it was very quick that I realized I did not enjoy that either. So I positioned myself to lead the bank's compliance and enterprise risk management process. So coming out of Sarbanes-Oxley, the bank had not yet formalized that process. So I asked my manager if I could own it with her. And I had to learn emotional intelligence. I had to learn how to get information from pretty high level executives. That one, didn't want me there. 2, they were often very busy. They knew everything about their roles. I didn't know much at all. So, while that was a little detour on my path, it was, I think, something that was also equally as important, just in terms of building that confidence, emotional intelligence. And then one of the coolest jobs I've ever had is at Title IX Sports. So Title IX was my first experience in-house accounting. I joined, it was a woman-owned, no outside investors, all about risk-taking and being a team. And I joined there as just a general auditor, staff accountant, not an auditor, a staff accountant. And I had to very quickly jump in and understand almost a forensic accounting exercise. How did a 20-year-old system combined with the accounting system post certain entries? Were they right? Were they wrong? And I threw my whole heart and soul into that as well. It was my first real view into how important both timely and accurate data for accounting really was. The culture there was just absolutely phenomenal. It was a big open warehouse gym. There was always music blasting, personal trainers there. So I had to really learn how to focus in that type of environment. But I had some great experience. I was not only able to work at the distribution center for a little bit of time, I worked directly with the president on daily cash management requirements. I was able to help with inventory planning. And ultimately, I saw myself staying there for a very long amount of time. But what led me to LogicSource was, going back to my husband asking me to go to Alaska. My family was on the East Coast, and I always saw myself going back there. And ultimately, that's where we landed.
Wow. Nice overview for us, Niki. Thank you. That's chapter 1 overview, as you explained to us. It sounds like something of an exciting chapter in light of the different geographies you mentioned. And I can't imagine the accountant population in Alaska is all that large. And I guess, as you explained, you land and you got the job. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. Next day.
The next day you got the job. And then you come down the West Coast because you mentioned the bank that's in Portland. And of course, Tile 9 is in San Francisco. And as you just explained, you want to go back east. That's where family is. And there's a recruiter that happened to call you. Is that right? Or were you already dealing with a recruiter in the past? Had you dealt with this recruiter?
So no, and I actually found the recruiter and reached out to her on my own. So once I called her and told her, hey, this is why I'm looking for a job. Here are the aspects of the job that I'm looking for. I let her know I was going to be very specific in what I wanted because, again, having been through accounting jobs that I didn't like and now finding this job at Title IX that I was so passionate about, I knew there had to be something else out there that I would find that similar passion.
Just wanted to ask if we could get one more look back from you on chapter one, specifically Title IX, because you've emphasized what a great chapter it was for you or how much you enjoyed it. Why? What was it about that chapter?
Sure. At Title IX, I came in as an accountant and I moved my way up to controller, but I was actually acting as the CFO for quite a bit of time because I joined and I reported to a CFO who left the business and they did not replace that person. So I absorbed the team and a lot of the processes, which is what got me a lot of exposure to both the president and the CEO owner. At LogicSource, while it was on paper, a lateral move from controller to controller, interesting story, I was very excited to, again, PE-backed, board of directors. I had never had that aspect of my life in my work. And so I was actually driving cross country. My dad flew out to San Francisco to meet me. I was in my Jeep, my dad, my Alaskan Malamute, and me, and we had the rest of our stuff because my husband, he already moved back east. And we decided to make a road trip. So we went to the Grand Canyon, we drove, through Nashville and up the East Coast. And while I was driving, David Pennino, the LogicSource CEO, I had not met him. He called and he said, hey, Niki, great to meet you. I'm so excited to have you on board. And I just want to let you know that when you start, our co-founder and CFO, he's moving on, but don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And so here I was going into this opportunity already hesitant and a little bit nervous, but excited. Now I find out the person I plan to report to and learn all of this information about how to advance my career, he was no longer going to be there. So while it took me 6 years to get the CFO title, I was interim CFO on paper since day one, which I think it could have gone two ways. Some days it really frustrated me that I was doing the CFO role at LogicSource from day one. And some days it gave me the motivation that it's on paper, but I knew I wasn't qualified to be a CFO. And so continue to prove myself, continue to take on more. And I think that's a big differentiator in my career.
Wow, some great details and a great story. And how important that mindset was that you adopted, where you sort of readily admit you're not an experienced CFO, but at the same time, you're willing to step up and take on the responsibilities with the, I imagine, CEO's blessing and mentorship. But you've also got the investors on board. And here's what I'd like to ask you. Early on, when you had to go before the board, were there times that were something of a nail biter for you? What would you tell us?
All of them were terrifying. And I tell you, there was our lead investor at the time, very early on. We had the managing partner of the firm on our board, and he made it very clear in executive session over and over and over again that he did not believe in me. And I wasn't in those meetings, so I'm very grateful that I had Dave Pennino, who was honest and open with me and says, listen, here's what I'm hearing. I believe in you. You have to believe in yourself and you got to keep going. But he did not, this investor, this board member, he did not believe. I didn't have the experience of all the other CFOs that were at Bain Capital. I didn't have the years of experience, the technical abilities. We were very quickly dealing with how do we even break apart our P&Ls? Do we have departmental level P&Ls? How do we have customer level P&Ls? What is the actual profitability of each of these lines of business? So I was very deep into, really setting the foundation of the LogicSource financials. And so for me to break up and be able to act more strategically, I wasn't there. So yeah, every single presentation that I gave to the board, every single investor meeting, I was on edge. I was nervous. I was wanting to make sure that I could not only prove myself, but, always make sure that I was doing what Dave believed that I could do. But it was terrifying.
And again, it seems like your CEO from the start was going to be your champion. Am I overstating that, or how do you
No,
look at
he
it?
he absolutely has been. He's been the one to give me all the opportunities. And, I've heard something along the way that, the work is going to come before the belief in yourself. And so it's almost like my self-confidence wasn't fully there. But when I would look back and say, okay, well, I've never done this, but Dave is asking me to do this, and or the board is asking me to do this, I need to just go figure out how to do it. I always found a way, and there were a lot of times early on that I was in the office at 6 a.m. and I left at midnight. And, this was pre-marriage, pre-kids and all that. And I had the time to be able to invest. And I just always wanted to outwork everybody. And the more I was able to prove to myself that I was actually getting the work done and providing that value, more and more people started to come on board and recognize me as one of their peers, or someone that they could confide in, or even, the investors would call me up personally, and I'd be able to answer their questions for them.
Well, thank you for a terrific career journey segment. We don't often talk about confidence and how important it really is to success. And your story sort of reveals how it goes hand in hand with hard work, allowing it to grow along with your experience. We can't wait to talk to you a little more about your career a little later in the podcast. But right now, we have to get to our business segment, where we always open just by asking you about your company. So please tell us about LogicSource. What does this company do today, and what are its offerings about?
Sure. To put it simply, at LogicSource, we help companies buy better. So we are an execution-based firm focused exclusively on the sourcing and procurement of indirect expenditures. So that's also known as goods not for resale, or in the healthcare space, they call these expenditures non-clinical spend. And these indirect expenses typically represent about 20% of an organization's annual revenues. And we're also finding it's typically one of the areas of the greatest spending inefficiencies. So think about categories like marketing, packaging, store development and FF&E, IT, corporate services, distribution, logistics, and more. And often it's these complex categories that the organizations don't typically have the scale or the expertise to be able to be best in class for buying. And it's found across all industries. So it's from retail to consumer packaged goods, healthcare to publishing, financial services, and more. The way I explain this to my family is, when I break it down and try to make it more simple, is take a leading retailer. So two of our clients are Lululemon and the Tractor Supply. So they are leaders in their spaces. They know exactly what to buy, who to buy it from, what process innovations they need to make and when, how to structure those supplier relationships. But they know how to do that for all the things they ultimately sell to the consumer. They're probably having a merchandising department of anywhere from 2 to 3 to 400 people. But on the indirect side of the business, they might have 5 or 10 people. And so from a money management context, from a CFO perspective, they're essentially not managing what could be billions of dollars worth of indirect expenditures. Actually, I just heard on Friday, David Kirshner, who joined LogicSource as a managing partner, he was the CFO at Boston Children's Hospital. He said, and I have it written down in my notes from actually just on Friday, he said that indirect procurement is like a beer belly. And he says, you don't notice it, and it slowly adds up over time. The quick fixes and the diets aren't going to fix it. So you really have to come up with something that's more sustainable. And I thought that was a really unique way to describe the indirect expenses. At LogicSource, our buying utility, we have all of the critical components of what makes procurement successful. So we have pre-built assets ready to deploy. These include our dedicated on-site account resources. We have more than 120 indirect category experts in our Center of Excellence. We have a one-market procure-to-pay technology platform and a supplier ecosystem of thousands of preferred pre-vetted suppliers and more than $85 billion in cross-client spending leverage that we can use. So that's essentially what LogicSource is. I think what makes LogicSource unique in the marketplace is that every client engagement, the way we start is we have a for free or kind of an investment model that LogicSource will go into our prospects and basically go through and say, let's do a health check. Let's look to see at no cost, no obligation. We'll do a deep dive in at all of their procurement practices. And ultimately, at the end of that, we deliver what would be a partnership model for them to include all of the target savings, benchmarking, and sourcing strategies.
Let's talk about metrics a little bit. What are the top of mind metrics? What's really the metrics that you're paying close attention to day in and day out?
Yeah, there's two main metrics for me that drive all of my forecasting. One of them is unit cost modeling, and our largest expense is compensation and benefits. So I need to know from a unit model standpoint where everybody is spending their time, from a resource forecasting, utilization, how busy are they? When do they need more work? So it's a lot of making sure we're deploying the right assets in terms of people to the right projects at the right time, and making sure that, one, we don't have people who don't have enough work to do because ultimately they'll end up bored and probably go to look somewhere else, or two, that we don't have too many people who are running too hot because then they're going to burn out. So we have to make sure we're projecting all of the business activities, all of our Center of Excellence does about 15,000 sourcing activities per year. So they're in the market every single day. And we need to make sure that it's not just a small group of people doing those activities, that we divide it equally across the groups. So that would be probably my number one. And then number two, in no particular order, is all of the growth metrics. So we very much are in a growth phase right now. So we developed several years ago a growth database that looks at forecasting our business from initial prospect meeting all the way through to first dollar of revenue or when the contract signs. And so today I can look back with years worth of data and a pretty strong level of comfort that if we have an initial C-suite meeting today, at what point will we kick off our mutual value assessment, which is when we go in and do that deep dive for free on our nickel. When will we ultimately get to contracting? How long will that take? And then when will first dollar of revenue come in? And those metrics are tied very intricately with the unit cost modeling I mentioned before, because knowing when we're going to have new business come on will ultimately decide at what areas and what time we have to bring on new resources.
Well, just the fact that you, as you explained to us, it was 9 years ago that you arrived. And again, the company at that place in time, the CFO was leaving. You've been over that period really on the data journey with the company. I mean, it seems like you've been very aware from the start. And when we say data, as you know, there's a lot of non-financial metrics today. And I'm wondering, you are perhaps one of the champions or key architects of some of these metrics that you knew you would need as the business became driven more by data. Is there anything that you can share with us about that data journey?
Absolutely. Well, you're right. I mean, when I joined LogicSource, there were less than 100 employees. And so there were some very solid success stories, but it was a company that was still very much finding itself. I found immediately diving into my own role that I didn't have what I needed to be successful. So yes, it was a very entrepreneurial company. We were getting through with a lot of muscle power and it was super admirable. However, again, I couldn't do my job. And ultimately, I wasn't going to be able to report appropriately without understanding those departmental P&Ls, the customer P&Ls, and I couldn't even get to those without understanding utilization and time tracking. So we had to very quickly put in repeatability, some systems, give ourselves the ability to look forward and not just look backwards. So one of the very first things that I did was reorganize the financials completely. They were audited, they were accurate, but they were done in PowerPoint. And so you can imagine there were journal entries that were being done and not posted to the ERP system. It was very difficult to look back and piece things together. It was impossible to look forward. So while restructuring the kind of accounting day-to-day monthly close process, we also started implementing a time tracking system. We started building out that growth database to track. I mean, we looked at calendars going back from, I think it was 2013 all the way through to be able to say, okay, when was this meeting? When was that meeting? And build out all the metrics and data. But far away from anything else, I think from a culture standpoint, the hardest thing that we did was implement that utilization process. Because, I mean, technically it wasn't difficult, but from a culture standpoint, it was something that people felt like we were spying on them and trying to inspect what it is that they do on a day-to-day basis. From an ideological standpoint, people were just uncomfortable with saying, okay, I spent 1 hour on this client, I spent 1 hour over here, or, oh, wait, I actually only worked 7 hours today because I didn't have enough work. People were really worried. So that from a change management standpoint, that was difficult to roll out. But today, it's people understand if they want to add more resources on their team, they better come with the data from the system to prove and show that they actually need it. It was these fundamental building blocks that took us from having this limited amount of data to now we have a forward-looking forecast that's pretty accurate. We often check how are we trending against our forecast, and we said last year that this is where we were going to be. Where are we actually? So those past experiences are something that we still pull on with the data, but we're much more data-driven than ever before.
Meanwhile, you also had a hand in building the finance team, one would imagine, given all the time you've gone back. Can you tell us about maybe some of the choices or how you might have organized it? It seems like you could make those key decisions as to, when hiring the next person was really a big deal, getting a hire, you had the opportunity to be involved.
Yeah. I think one of the most important lessons that I have learned at LogicSource is hiring the team that I deserve. And for a long time, I was so focused on the tactical day-to-day, and I had to get all these systems and metrics in place. But I also was very much focused on closing the books at the end of the month and chasing invoices. And finally, I was able to get the team where, we're still a very lean team from a finance and accounting perspective. There's 4 of us, including myself. But my team is so phenomenal that I don't have to be in the day-to-day. And it has allowed me to expand my scope of responsibility outside of finance, where now as CFO and Chief Administrative Officer, I also have legal and compliance, as well as HR, talent and recruiting and administration reporting in through me. And so what I had to do was, okay, I felt like I got finance in a place where it was working and it was operating. And now I had to take my abilities and really come up with some philosophies in these other departments and then find the teams to be able to execute upon those. And I look for people who have a lot of the same characteristics as me in terms of passion, hard work, ethics, and all of that, but who have the skill sets that I might not otherwise have. Because, I don't ever want to be the lawyer that's reviewing the contract. I want, our general counsel to have that fully, and she does. And, I want from a HR and recruiting standpoint, I want that team to be able to deal with any employee relations issues or, going and sourcing the best candidates for the job. So, I think it's been great to be able to see these groups and internal functions expand as the business expands, because like me, there's a lot of similar stories at LogicSource where we've been able to bring people in and they've grown themselves as the business has grown.
Now, having been part of a PE-backed firm for some time now, curious what advice you might have for other CFOs who kind of a new experience where perhaps a new investment's been made, the type of relationship that you have with those investors. Can you describe it?
I've always gone into it with a sense of honesty and transparency and, not waiting to tell the bad news. I think probably bad news always comes first and the good news comes after the fact, but I want them to be along this journey with me as much as I am. So making sure that they know what's going on is super critical. And kind of separate from that, but also knowing what's going on, I would tell anybody who's jumping into this journey something that I wish I knew earlier on, which is actually understanding the operational side of the business as much as your peers, because the connectivity with finance is so critical. And it helps to be able to understand where you deploy, which assets, what funding goes where, if you really understand what it is that each department is trying to solve for. So what are their department goals? What is their strategy? For me to be able to say, oh, wait, you're trying to do this, but so is so-and-so over here, eliminate some duplicative spend. So I always knew if I understood the business more, it would make my life as a finance professional easier, but I didn't realize to the extent. So that's something that I just wish that I knew a little bit earlier.
We want to touch on talent with you. And pandemic led finance leaders to get more focused on talent. First, because of the risks it posed, but then the human capital challenges. And of course, the great resignation was something a lot of companies were dealing with even a year ago still. Can you tell us whether your mindset when it comes to talent has evolved over time? And what would you share with us?
I would say it absolutely has evolved. And I feel very fortunate to be part of a firm that has put itself in a position to not only survive during COVID, but thrive on our way out of COVID. And that was one of the main pillars that we talked about all the way through from the first week of lockdown. We don't want to just survive. We want to thrive on the back end of this. So we didn't really put anybody on furlough. We eliminated 9 positions and brought all of those people back within 2 months. We were very passionate about making sure that as a business, who our biggest expense is comp and ben, that we were going to take care of our people through this time period that nobody knew what was going on. So it was difficult along the way. Don't get me wrong. We had to make sure that, the executive team took a pay cut. We didn't have incentive compensation along the way, but we are now coming through it. And I feel like this company is in a better position than ever. And from a resource standpoint today, what has happened is we're now looking outside of Norwalk, Connecticut. So LogicSource is based in Norwalk, Connecticut, soon to be Westport, Connecticut, as we're moving our offices. But we are now very much a do what's best for you and your family type of culture and environment. So if you live in California and you want to work at LogicSource, that's great. If you want to live in Norwalk but not come to the office, that's fine too. It's allowed our recruiting team to really find the best talent across this whole country rather than being tied to a specific area. I think we've found that our workforce has appreciated that because we're treating everybody like adults, as opposed to hall monitors, making sure people are, in their seats from 8 to 5. And for me, that's been the biggest from a resource and culture standpoint. That's been the biggest positive coming out of COVID.
We're going to move then to our finance strategic moment question, which is where I ask you just to look back over your career and share a moment of insight that you've had as a finance executive or leader where you saw something because of your lines of sight into the business. And whether it was a risk or an opportunity that could be pursued, don't know. But what comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
At the core of what we do at LogicSource is optimize indirect spend. So we create real efficiencies and real P&L savings for our customers. And it was for the first few years that I was at LogicSource. I mean, we're still in growth mode, but we were really in early growth mode, investing heavily in front of revenues. We had to make sure that there was the right cost containment, the right allocation of budget. 80% plus of our expenses were comp and ben. So anytime we had to throttle back or accelerate, we always looked at comp and ben. And so I'm almost embarrassed to say it and how long it took me. But at some point on my journey, I started questioning, wait a second, we are saving our clients, CFOs, millions of dollars. Why aren't we taking advantage of our own services? Our company wasn't obviously the same size and scale of some of these, multi-billion-dollar companies, but LogicSource delivers these customized solutions, providing resources and technology to companies that would otherwise be cost prohibitive for the customers to build our own. So again, I was questioning, why aren't we doing this ourselves? So we actually started taking advantage of our own services and leveraging our own data. And we started working with our category experts. So think back when I talked about the categories: marketing, packaging, distribution and logistics, et cetera, who are currently executing those 15,000 sourcing projects per year. We have $85 billion worth of spend leverage. So we started working with them and we started seeing those efficiencies. So we now know as a company of a size and scale that wouldn't otherwise understand what price benchmarking we should have, we're now getting the best pricing. We are now getting the best contract terms because we also see a magnitude of contracts from the same vendor over and over and over again because we're in the market every day. So we know specific customers or specific vendors, these are their best terms and what LogicSource should get those terms. So to me, that was the biggest strategic moment in making sure that we could move away from throttling so much on comp and ben and look at some of these indirect expenditures that really weren't going to move the needle so much from the standpoint that, of course, it was if we could reduce them, but otherwise it wasn't going to. And another thing that seems so basic now is leveraging our own internal technology. So the one market technology I mentioned before, we rolled out our own P2P, so procure to pay workflow. So our accounting team is no longer getting surprised with invoices showing up. So if there was a temp working and nobody knew, we would have to make that payment, but we weren't prepared for it. So now we have that whole workflow set through our own one market procure to pay system.
From episode 853, this is 1 Minute with Chip Vint, CFO of Deluxe.
If all things are equal, just based off how the revenue is moving, we know what it's going to do to our profitability, our mix. And so keeping our eye on the ball on revenue and the pipeline behind it is oh so important. We also have to focus very hard on our expense growth factors. So think of that as your expense growth ratio to your revenue growth, right? And you can't have any one area where if revenue is going to grow 3%, you can't have your expenses grow 6%. And so it's discipline inside the portfolio. And there's things that are declining, the expenses need to decline in line with it. And things that are growing, the expense growth has to be controlled and tethered and stay in sync. And so we're always focused on that expense growth factor. It's kind of an E to R ratio, but it's a different thought.
Okay, well, we'll jump to our mentoring round then, where we'll ask you several quick questions intended to inspire and inform. You kind of helped us understand a little bit better your unique path to the CFO office, but we're wondering about, you finally got the title and stepped into the role, and oh gosh, you just wish someone had told you this before you actually got the office. Anything come to mind for us that first 90 days? If you could go back and just tell yourself one item, what would it be?
To be honest, by the time I got the title, I had felt like I was already doing the job for so long that there wasn't any single thing. It's probably more along the way, a couple things. I wish that whole get the team you deserve. I wish, I had picked up on that a little bit earlier because it did exponentially make my life easier. It did allow me to start branching outside of accounting and finance to some of these other areas of the business. And then once I was there, it's the whole, I wish that I really understood how much I should understand what everyone else is doing so that I can provide value. I think, again, it's just that whole connectivity with accounting and finance, everything comes through there. So it's better to see things in advance than to see things after the fact.
Niki, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. We're wondering if there's a personal habit that you're known for, a part of a daily routine, maybe something you do that people point out and say, she's always done that.
Yeah. I think like many people, I will say exercise and working out, but I'll take it a little bit further. I think that is very relevant to this role and this position at LogicSource specifically, because I have over the time, whether it be through college sports or just being an athlete after the fact, I've tried to take that mental toughness to the job. So I think back when I was told by that lead investor, the board member, that they didn't believe in me, they were vocal about, I didn't have that experience. I think I could have shut down, but I took the mental toughness and allowed me to turn that into a motivation. I always use exercise and that mantra of hard work and effort in my daily life. So I think that has just allowed me to take those habits into my professional life. And, there's definitely been days and moments where I didn't want to keep going, but it was my habits that allowed me to just keep pushing through.
Great. Thank you for that. We're wondering if you have a book selection for us. Anything? It might be a book you escape with. It might be a business book. Doesn't have to be.
Yep. So I'm actually very embarrassed to say that when I'm not reading the financial statements, I'm reading to my 4 and 5-year-old. So the only books that I have are for kids between the ages of like 3 to 6, but I do have a good one, and it's called The Golden Acorn, and it's about a squirrel, and it is a squirrel who essentially is in a race, and every year it's about the one fastest person, and every year the squirrel wins. But this year they changed it, and it's a team sport. So the squirrel is all mad that he now has to wait on his friends, so he doesn't wait. So the squirrel runs forward, but the acorn is so heavy he can't move it himself. And so ultimately what the squirrel has to do is come back and get his team up to speed, make sure everybody's moving at the same pace, and then they can go get the acorn. So I know that's not the book you were probably looking for, but I think it works.
We've got a few children's books on, so I know we have our own little shelf set aside for those. So thank you for that.
Oh, good. Okay.
I'm sure there are many parents who will enjoy that. Thank you. We are up to our final question, where we'll ask you to look forward finally. And we're wondering about the next 12 months and what your priorities are as a CFO. What would those be?
My role, I think, has that natural evolution into a more operational role. And so while I'm also trying to get the forward financials and forecasting into a more automated fashion, I'm also really looking forward to focusing on the client delivery aspect of what LogicSource does and helping to apply a lot of the learnings that I had from early on in automating and forward-looking financing, forecasting to how we deliver our services. So, we used to look back with our customers and say, here's how much we saved you. Now it's about not only here's how much we saved you in terms of millions of dollars, but also here's when the next crop of savings are going to hit. And I'm really excited to be able to work with our analytics team and be able to develop that in a more automated fashion.
Nice. Niki Heim, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thanks, Jack.
Hello, Thought Leader listeners. As you have perhaps already heard or even seen, we're now featuring the career lessons and moments of strategic insight shared by our CFO guests as Thought Leader videos. You can now find these videos on our blog at cfothoughtleader.com and, of course, our newsletters, but also on LinkedIn. If you haven't already, please go ahead and follow our CFO Thought Leader LinkedIn company page, and you'll be certain not to miss a single Thought Leader video debut. CFO Thought Leader, the #1 thought leadership platform exclusively for and by CFOs. As always, thank you for listening.